I grew up in a family that had more than we need.
In fact, Morgan Curtis grew up a horse girl.
Private school and ponies. I was really into horses. Ski vacations, ancestors in paintings on the wall.
Wow.
Family silver. I was taught to be grateful for the privileges that we had, but I wasn't ever taught where they came from or why people that didn't have them.
Ollie and I are meeting Morgan in person for the first time to talk about those privileges and how Morgan is trying to make up for them.
See, it all started back when Morgan was in college. Like a lot of the people we've spoken to for this series, she was a climate activist. She was leading a campaign to get Dartmouth to divest from fossil fuels.
And then she found out about the secret bank account.
I learned there was a bank account in my name that my father had set up for me when I was small that was invested, and it was invested in some of the very same corporations that I was campaigning against. And I could see Chevron, Exxon. It was a huge shock to realize, me and my family are doing the thing that I'm asking this institution to stop doing. That was the kind of first immediate level of beginning to learn what has my family profited from.
So you found out about this, and what was the next thing you did? Did you call your dad or?
Yeah, I called him and was like, Dad, what is this? And he was like, oh no, you weren't supposed to know about that.
Several hard conversations with her dad followed.
I immediately wanted him to divest from those same companies. And that took a little while, but he did eventually agree to doing that and actually make the same choice for his own investment accounts.
But for Morgan, that was really just the beginning. Now she's given away all the money in that secret account. Everything she's inherited from her parents, at least so far.
As I began to understand the history of colonization in the United States and histories of slavery and histories of our capitalist economic model, that I began to see, wait a second, my family has been making choices that have extracted wealth from other communities. And that was when some bigger emotions began to set in, shame and distress.
Morgan told us she plans to redistribute anything else she gets, because for her, that money is basically dirty money.
As I began to locate myself and my family in those histories, I didn't anymore feel like this money was mine. And so I went from wanting to divest from fossil fuels to wanting to divest from the entire stock market to wanting to give the money away entirely.
We've already told you about Aileen Getty, a member of one of the most prominent oil families in the world. She's helping fund groups like Just Stop Oil, which are demanding an end to the fossil fuel industry that made her family rich. And Aileen isn't alone. She's part of a much bigger trend: wealthy heirs who are funding movements that challenge their families' legacies.
It's ruffling some feathers in their families and beyond. And I'll admit, when I first heard that wealthy heirs were spending their inheritances like this, it activated the skeptical part of my brain. Was there something else going on?
Yeah, we wanted to dig deeper. So today, we're going to meet a few more of these people. How did they get here? What are they trying to achieve?
And what or who are they ultimately loyal to? I'm Samantha Altman.
And I'm Alessandra Ram.
This is Sabotage from Good Luck Media. Episode 8, The Traitors.
Okay, I think we should back up a little bit and explain just how we found Morgan in the first place.
It turns out she's a part of an organization called Resource Generation.
I think I'd always felt like I was a Venn diagram of one, between my class background and my family history and my politics and what I wanted to see happen in the world. And going to my first resource generation conference was this big exhale of relief of like, oh no, wait, there is a lot of us who are questioning these assumptions that we've been handed around where this money came from and what it should do.
Resource generation describes itself as a group for younger people, aged 35 and below, who have class privilege and are committed to social justice. Many of its members, like Morgan, inherited their wealth. But rather than feeling lucky about it, a lot of them feel a sense of shame. The group helps these people process complicated feelings about their money and then give it away to social and climate justice movements. And just to clarify, resource generation isn't directly associated with Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion, but its members do fund organizations like them.
Maybe a simpler way to put that is a lot of resource generation members know that the sources of their wealth damaged the planet or exploited people, so they're trying to give it back to the communities that were harmed.
Right. They want to end wealth hoarding.
What was new for me at Resource Generation was the courage with which people named numbers, were willing to say, my family has $10 million or I have $2 million. And I saw right away how much that contributed to unraveling some of the secrecy and vagueness and confusion that can happen when numbers aren't named.
Can you tell me just a little bit more about that? Like, why is it so uncomfortable to say that out loud?
Yeah, particularly for people with wealth, it's considered very rude to talk about numbers. It's not polite. It's not a thing that one does. And so there's that, for some people, that type of cultural conditioning. And there's also, I think, in many wealthy communities, this type of fear of, well, if people knew how much money I had, they would come for me, or they would be asking me for it all the time, or they'd be trying to scam me to get it. Yeah, I think the secrecy serves the hiding and the hoarding. And as we practice transparency, there's more ability for the money to flow.
If that sounds thorny, it's because it is.
Yeah, Morgan had to go on a journey to get to where she is today, one that dug up family secrets that date back to the early history of the United States.
So some of my ancestors arrived on the Mayflower or shortly thereafter, and were part of that initial wave of displacement and genocide against Native people. And I learned that I had ancestors in the area now called New England that in 1700s enslaved both Native and folks of African descent.
Learning about what her ancestors did was horrifying for Morgan and catalyzing.
So you want to give away all money that you might inherit?
That's what I've done with that money that I've initially inherited from my dad, which was supposed to be my college fund. I chose to redistribute that to primarily Black and Indigenous-led organizing and land projects.
These days, Morgan's living a different life than the one she used to have. She's traded in the luxury homes she grew up in for Canticle Farm. It's a property that's part urban garden, part community space in Oakland, California. She lives there with a few dozen other people. And today, she's giving us a tour. How long have you lived here?
I've been here for 8 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I came when I was 24 and I'm 32, so it's most of my adult life.
That's right. When she first showed up in Oakland, Morgan was just a young climate activist.
There were 3 of us who came here in 2016 who were on the U.S. youth delegation to COP22, the UN climate talks. And so we came here for a training retreat, and all of us still live here.
As you might imagine, Morgan's shift from ponies and private schools to private wealth redistribution is making waves in her family.
The choice to redistribute these resources is really hard for my parents to understand. A really meaningful moment for me was actually this summer when I got married, and at the wedding were 45 members of my extended family and also many of my friends from community, from organizing, from redistribution work. And so my parents got to meet some of the people that I gave their money to. And it was really powerful to hear my dad be like, "That guy's great." And me be like, "Yeah, that's why I chose to resource their work."
What's really interesting is that Morgan is many, many generations removed from these relatives who enslaved people. But she sees a clear line between their violence and exploitation and the privilege she has now. She feels guilt, but also a personal responsibility to make it right. And she wants to help others who feel the same way.
You see, Morgan is what we'll call an heir whisperer.
I'm a money coach. I support people who've inherited wealth to redistribute those resources back to the communities they were taken from.
That means Morgan works with people who've inherited a lot of money and helps them as they figure out how to spend it or give it away. Her clients tend to have progressive values in politics, as well as big conflicted feelings about their wealth.
But as she tells it, she was reluctant to get into this line of work.
For quite some time, like my peers and mentors, particularly those of color, had been inviting me to do the work with my own people. And I had resisted that for some time. I'd been like, I don't even like white wealthy people. Like, put a lot of work into getting away from that world that I grew up in. But ultimately, it was about realizing that there is something that my people of these communities could contribute other than harm.
So that's what she's been doing for the past 5 years, working as a money coach, almost like a therapist for rich people.
If you're starting with a new client, how does it go?
Often folks are coming in with feelings of overwhelm or paralysis or loneliness or guilt, shame, disconnection, denial. It's intimate work. And so I'm with people in their struggles and in their moments of, I don't know if I can do this. And I also support people with some of the obstacles that are more external, like navigating legal and financial constraints or getting financial education that they might have never gotten.
Just like she did, Morgan's clients have work to do. And it starts with something that can feel kind of uncomfortable: transparency. Which is why, towards the end of our conversation, Morgan remembered that she'd forgotten to do something important. She needed to come clean.
Did I actually name my numbers? That is important for me to do.
Do you want to do that now?
I do. We talked earlier about the importance of transparency in money. And yeah, for me, I inherited about $550,000, which was supposed to be a college fund account for me. And that's what I've redistributed so far. And I don't know what I will inherit in future. My dad has been pretty clear around, well, if you gave that away, you're not getting any more. But I don't know if he'll actually follow through on that. But my best guess of my parents' wealth is somewhere around $15 million.
Now, you might not think that $500,000 is a lot of money. Even her parents' millions don't make them ultra wealthy. But paradoxically, if she had more, that might have made her less likely to give it away.
That's because, according to Morgan, the more money her clients have, the harder it is for them to part with it.
I mean, definitely something I've seen in my work is that it's often the people at the less wealthy end of the spectrum who are making the more radical moves, who are the ones that are divesting entirely from the stock market, redistributing all of the money. And it's the folks who are on the wealthier end of the wealthy spectrum who have to go through a longer emotional and logistical journey to be able to make those same radical choices.
Why do you think that is?
I think folks with an amount of wealth that perhaps means they never have to work and were raised with the belief that they would never have to work. It's a really hard place to shift from. Sometimes it's even having been told, like, you don't have to be good at anything because there will always just be money to support you. And so sometimes it's a journey of like having the self-confidence and the self-belief to try and set up one's life for having less of these resources.
Speaking of people on the wealthier end of the wealthy spectrum, when we get back, we meet another heir, someone whose grandfather was once the richest man in America. And this time, she's coming to my house.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Alessandra. Thanks so much for coming. Sure, yeah, it's really easy.
This is Leah Hunt Hendricks. We interviewed her in Berkeley this spring. And Ollie, I think for both of us, it was a little nerve-wracking.
Right. I'd never had an heiress over before. I bought flowers the night before and was super stressed that the house wasn't nice enough or that our at-home recording setup was too scrappy.
But it was fine because Leah's used to hanging out with the plebes. She's basically made it her life's work to organize alongside and in solidarity with activists.
She recently co-wrote a book about it called Solidarity.
And just like everyone else in this episode, her money story took a turn when she was in school.
I was in graduate school at Princeton University, and I was living in Brooklyn and writing my dissertation from there when Occupy Wall Street started.
In 2011, inspired by the Arab Spring and student activists at the University of California, protesters occupied Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. Like Just Stop Oil, Occupy had a disruptive spirit, but the focus was economic inequality and the 1%.
So I was interested in money and politics and also in the power of social movements. And so this movement erupts in downtown New York, and I was just a few minutes away. So I went over and began to come to Occupy regularly and just learn about how it was organized and what was happening and I got to know people who were involved. And it was amazing to see this movement start to thrive. We had a welcome table. So when people would be walking by the park, I had a little table with a few other people.
Occupy orientation.
Exactly. That's what it was. Yeah. We were like, what's this movement all about? Like, come talk to us about it and we'll just give you the one-on-one.
Meanwhile, Leah was getting her own crash course.
One of the things I realized was that even just a short-lived movement that didn't have a lot of infrastructure behind it needed some resources. There needed to be porta potties for all the people who were around. There needed to be food to feed everyone, some security to keep people safe who were sleeping in the park, and, supplies, speakers for protests, and art supplies to make posters and signs.
People probably don't think about that.
Yeah. And so I began to think with a few other people I knew about how do social movements get funded and supported? And especially, how do we sustain them from being momentary uprisings to, long-term movements that have real impact on policy and on our social and political structures?
These questions were the beginning of something big for Leah. Immersing herself in Occupy opened her eyes to a simple fact. Movements need resources to succeed. And she started to realize that as a wealthy person, she could really make a difference.
We began to create an organization that we called Solidaire. The idea was how can wealthy people be in solidarity with social movements? We would gather together about once a month. Often at my house, I would cook dinner and people would come over, and sometimes we would have a movement leader, some organizer come and talk about things that they were working on. And we would talk about how do we think we get from, an occupation of a public park to, restructuring the economy, and what's the role of money in that.
And yeah, money plays a major role.
You think of Friedrich Engels supporting the work of Karl Marx. Engels, was the son of a factory owner, and the women's movement had wealthy patrons. Abolition. The Secret Six is an example of some of the patrons of John Brown, who was involved in abolition.
But as the saying goes, more money, more problems.
You've said that all working class movements need access to wealthy patrons to succeed. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I don't love actually hearing that as a blanket statement, because I don't want anyone to feel constrained if they don't have access to a wealthy patron. Social movements need financial resources, and there's an opportunity for wealthy people to participate in those movements, to be in solidarity with those movements. But it's tricky too. You want to be on guard.
What Leah's talking about here is called movement capture, when funders pressure activists to change direction. According to research by Megan Ming Francis, it's happened before with civil rights groups like the NAACP, and it can have harmful consequences.
Because I do think that we're in the middle of a class war. There's always a class war going on, and people want to protect their interests. Power does not give itself up without a fight.
I mean, Leah is a wealthy, powerful person, reminding us that wealthy, powerful people shouldn't be trusted so easily. That's why transparency is important.
Not all people who've inherited wealth, even if they are progressive like yourself, are, we found, comfortable talking about that money and talking about what they're doing with it, especially if it's giving it away to some causes. Would you be open to sharing with us why you think that is?
Why people are uncomfortable talking about their money? Well, in America, nobody wants to be upper class or admit that they're wealthy. I remember growing up, and my mom always said that we were middle class, or maybe upper middle class.
Right.
And
there's always the upper middle class.
Yeah. We, I think the ideal is a kind of middle class society, where everyone is on the same, on a similar level. Equality is a really beautiful ideal. I think it's hard to talk about wealth in part because it creates an obligation and a responsibility and expectations. And rightly, there should be accountability. If you've inherited wealth, or even if you've earned, more wealth than you need to live on, what right do you have to hoard that? Why do you deserve that money?
Right.
And I think that's hard for some people to even ask themselves. That's even just getting to that own self-questioning is hard and confrontational. And often the answer is, I don't deserve this. And then that's scary, that's disorienting. And, it leads you to really question how you live your life and all the choices you make.
Right.
So it's kind of an existential question to some extent. It's a question about your identity and your self-worth. And it can bring up a sense of shame.
That sense of shame still comes up for Leah when she thinks about her family's fortune.
Because Leah comes from the Hunt family. They're one of the wealthiest family dynasties in the U.S.
Like Getty-level wealthy.
Could you explain a bit more about your family's wealth and where it comes from?
So my grandfather was named H.L. Hunt. He was... the legend goes that he won the East Texas oil fields in a poker game. And he ended up being kind of a wildcatter. And this is in the 1930s, 30s and 40s. And he became very wealthy through his, as he built out his oil companies and other kind of affiliated companies.
Today, the Hunt Oil Company is one of the largest private independent oil and gas companies in the world. The family even owns the Kansas City Chiefs.
P.S. Remember J. Paul Getty? Well, Eileen's grandfather seemed to be an admirer of Leah's grandfather. Getty once said, quote, "In terms of extraordinary independent wealth, there is only one man, H.L. Hunt."
So yeah, Leah's grandfather was wildly successful, but his legacy is not just a simple American success story for her. H.L. Hunt was a major figure in right-wing politics for decades. He had his own talk radio show where he promoted eccentric, often racist, and anti-communist views. So it is no surprise that for Leah, being the heir to an oil fortune seems to stir up some internal conflict.
How did you feel growing up being part of the Hunt oil family?
Let's see. This is always really hard to talk about. I think it's really complicated because in a lot of ways, my grandfather saw himself as supplying a need that the world had. The world needed oil. We didn't know yet about climate change in the 1930s and 40s. And I think there's a lot of pride in having started a successful oil company.
And we should clarify, Leah doesn't have a position at Hunt Oil. She isn't on the board, so she doesn't make any decisions involving the company.
But she does benefit indirectly. Leah told us she doesn't own any company shares, but her mom is a partial owner of Hunt Oil. It's a family business, after all.
My grandfather's children all went on to do really interesting things. Lamar Hunt started the American Football League, and he was part of starting the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. I think he created the name the Super Bowl.
Really?
Because he was playing with one of those super bouncy balls. And when he was like, let's call it the Super Bowl. And my mom was really involved in the women's movement. My aunt has done amazing work on the role of women in conflict zones.
It's a complicated legacy.
We all have this legacy of being tied to an oil company that is contributing significantly to the climate crisis. So I think that I have felt guilt around that, but guilt is not a useful feeling if it paralyzes you. Guilt is useful if it can motivate you to start to take action.
So that's what Leah's doing, taking action.
But we did want to ask, why this kind of action? Why not focus specifically on fossil fuel companies? Deal with the problem at its source.
Do you believe fossil fuel companies should stop fossil fuel extraction?
I don't think that they will. I mean, just imagine that you're the CEO of an oil company. Why would you shut it down? Somebody else will just restart it. I don't think it's realistic to imagine that, fossil fuel companies are going to just decide to stop producing fossil fuels.
And there's no real pressure from the government either to make that happen.
But that's what there needs to be. I do think that protest and disruption have a real place in social movements. They force a conversation. It's uncomfortable. It's not polite. People don't like it. But it's important because it just forces an issue onto the agenda or into the conversation. And that's the point of the climate movement. Mm-hmm. Power doesn't give itself up willingly. So it has to be forced.
In Leah's view, we have to change laws and policies if we want to see a real impact. Companies don't act in our best interests. They're designed to prioritize profit over the planet.
And Leah's been working on policy changes for a while. So we wanted to hear how she measures her own impact. In a way, what is the legacy that she's building?
Do you feel like the work that you've done and the money that you've given has made a measurable impact?
I do. I've been encouraged to try to go ahead and say some of what I think the consequences are of my work, just in part so that people are aware that they too can do similar things. I was involved in Standing Rock, a lot of the indigenous protests against, the pipelines that were being built across indigenous lands, the movement for Black Lives. My organization, Solidaire, and I personally were very involved in kind of accompanying that movement over many years. I've been involved in supporting Justice Democrats, which recruited Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and helped build the Squad in Congress. Out of Occupy, I was involved in seeding an organization called Momentum, which was a training organization that helped incubate what became the Sunrise Movement, as well as If Not Now. The Sunrise Movement was putting forward the idea of the Green New Deal, which AOC supported.
The Green New Deal, by the way, is a groundbreaking climate proposal outlining everything from job creation to greenhouse gas emissions.
Ultimately, parts of it did get passed through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate legislation in history. And I think that legislation really can be traced back to the Green New Deal, to the Squad, to Sunrise. And I'm really proud of that work.
To summarize that long list, basically, Leah has financed and supported several key movements and political efforts of the past decade, from ending police violence against Black people to protecting Native land and resources to helping elect a new class of politicians who've pushed for landmark climate legislation. And the progress she's seen so far helps her feel optimistic about the future.
Do you feel hopeful right now about creating this mass movement for climate? I know that young people in particular, they really feel like no one is listening to them.
I know. I saw a t-shirt the other day that had a smiley face on it, and it said, "Don't worry, it's too late anyway." And I just thought, that is... I think a lot of people feel that way, and that's so devastating. And the problem is it's not too late, and it never is.
Talking about this seemed to stir up big feelings for Leah.
The work of organizing is really joyful work, and it's really meaningful. And there are benefits to being involved, not just because of the outcomes in society, but personally. Like, you will meet amazing people doing this work, and I'm like tearing up thinking about it. But
it's big stuff, right? It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Is doing this work how you cope with climate anxiety, the climate crisis, all of it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, what other options there are. I mean, it's either denial or it's despair, or it's finding ways to get involved and to be hopeful. And I feel grateful that I met people along the way who offered me a path into this work, and I hope that other people can find that for themselves. We're always pressured to find individual solutions and, to be a social entrepreneur or to be a founder or...
Guilty.
Well, we need those people too, but we need our founders also. Join something. You don't have to do it alone. Solidarity is really about recognizing that we are kind of fundamentally interconnected, and that my freedom is bound up in your freedom, and that we share this burning planet, and that we'll all be impacted by that.
This is an idea that's come up repeatedly as we've reported this series for the past year. Whether it's Just Stop Oil activists or Aileen Getty writing in The Guardian, they've all said something really similar. Basically, that everyone backing disruptive climate action is, on some level, acting in their own self-interest, because we all live on the same planet.
And we're in serious trouble.
Plus, some of these wealthy people, especially ones whose money comes from fossil fuels, they know they're a fundamental part of the problem.
Where do the ultra wealthy fit into this conversation? Do you believe they have more responsibility, and why?
Absolutely. Wealthy individuals, wealthy nations contribute more to the climate crisis. I'm a firm believer in climate reparations and the need for the U.S. to pay other countries to adapt to the climate crisis. Reparations are about repair. We don't want to admit guilt. So we don't want to admit that there's anything to make amends for. But there is.
There was one final thing we wanted to ask Leah. It was pretty spicy, so we saved it for the very end.
Do you think of yourself as a class traitor?
Yeah, why not?
I love that.
Yeah, I have no commitment to the upper middle class.
Just the upper middle class, yeah.
No, but I want to live in a world that is more equal and fair and where everyone has enough, and absolutely want to support movements that redistribute wealth and power. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with being a class traitor. Unless you're a class traitor to the working class.
Yeah, so there's an exception. Okay, so we've talked to oil heiresses. We've talked to NASA scientists. But now it's time to go back to the beginning, to the shocking stunt that started it all. On the next and final episode of Sabotage, we hear from the two young people who pissed off the whole world and have no plans to stop.
Sabotage is an original production from Good Luck Media. The show is hosted, reported, and executive produced by Alessandra Ram and me, Samantha Oltman. Our producer is Hannah Chinn. Our consulting senior producer is Rebecca Sananes. Our audio engineer is Erick Gomez, with original music by Daniel G. Harmon. With executive producers Adam McKay and Stacey Roberts Steele, produced in partnership with Yellow Dot Studios. Sabotage is represented by Drew Wellborn from WME and Andrew Randoni from Bala in Los Angeles. Our show art is designed by Louisa Betancourt. If you want to check out Leah Hunt Hendricks' book with Astra Taylor, it's called Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea. We'll link to it in the show notes. Special thanks to Lauren Tatarsky, who we spoke to for this episode, and to Nick Carden of Carden Audio. Good Luck Media is an independent journalism studio where climate is the main character. We'll see you next week for our final episode of the season.